Hi, my name is Koku with blackfilm.com, and I'm here with Andrena Hale, co-executive producer of BET Plus original series American Gangster Trap Queens. We're now in season 3 that just debuted on April 7th. Thank you so much for joining me.
You are welcome. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited, and I love to speak with people that have a lot of credits behind the scenes and that really know how to get things together. So I'm interested in knowing what your journey to executive producer has been, and how did you arrive at that role, and why is it so good for you?
Oh my goodness. That's a loaded question. I don't know, I've been doing television. I had to start in the music industry. That's where I first started my professional career, and then ended up in television in 2010 and just worked my way up. I was a segment producer, so I was sort of like at the bottom of the totem pole, and just was like very interested in story and kept working with like the same production companies and producing a lot of different content, and learned the field and learned post and interviewed talent. I think my music background, having worked with music producers, helped me a lot in terms of like dealing with talent, because I worked with a lot of big music producers. I worked for Puffy. That was like my last job in the music industry. So I was surrounded by a lot of celebrities. So when I'm, managing talent for these documentaries, I think my past has helped me deal with them. So, and yeah, I just worked my way up by working really hard and just concentrating on the job and concentrating on telling really good stories. I think that's that's really the meat of it, is just working really hard.
That's interesting how one path can lead you to another, and it can still be a great fit. But it's interesting that you brought up the music industry, because I did pay particular attention to the fact that the music seems to blend very well with the storylines. Does that also inform why Little Kim is the person that narrates the series? I didn't know she was a narrator, but she's so good at it.
She is. We love Little Kim. Yes. That is like one of the reasons we wanted to, music is a huge part of telling stories. Music, like, it gives you the emotion and can punctuate the emotion that you're trying to get across in those moments that we're highlighting in the story. So it was important to the network and to A. Smith to make sure that we had like music talent that helped us tell the story, and who better than Queen Bee?
Of course, I love her. And so I have actually, I interviewed Tanessa Welch some months back, and yesterday I interviewed Miss T. Such interesting, compelling stories. I mean, what I like about the series is that you do talk about and show sort of the glamour and the glitz, but then you get into the sort of the cautionary tale of it all. Talk about like how you build that out and make sure that people know that you're not just glamorizing these great things that happen when other things happen too.
Yeah, these episodes that we produced are little documentaries. And it's really important to A. Smith and to BET that we're not glamorizing lives of crime. A lot of time people feel like they don't have any choice in terms of like building a life for themselves, in terms of making a living for themselves. And sometimes the only choices that they have is to turn to a life of crime, turn to the streets. But and along their journeys, it may look like it's a lot of fun because there's like money and you can buy things. And, as a culture, we love to flaunt and we love to floss. And so these women get caught up in that. But at the end of the day, each of them have had to pay a price. And so when we're speaking with these women early on in the development phase and deciding whether we're going to move forward with them to tell their stories, it's important that they're telling their tales as cautionary tales. Saying, yeah, you may not feel like you have a choice in the matter, and you might have to do what you have to do, but at the end of the day, you're going to pay. And it's what you have to pay is going to be bigger than what you gained while you were in the streets.
Do you ever feel like when you're reviewing stories and figuring out what makes sense for the show, that sometimes a person that may not necessarily be a right fit truly hasn't redeemed themselves? Has that ever been a situation?
Yes.
That was my biggest wonder. Like, this girl still wants to be in these streets.
Not necessarily wanting to still be in the streets, but not necessarily owning up to what they've done. I think that has been something that we've bumped up against a couple of times.
I liked actually watching Gina Cabell's story, because I've seen that kind of crime. Like, there was this sort of like an uptick of this kind of cyber crime going on. But she was very honest about saying, like, I just wanted more money, more money, more money. And of course, obviously this becomes something where it's like, just, kids don't do this at home. But I like that she was able to just own up to just the kind of the superficiality of it all.
Yeah, that because a lot of times that's what it is. You know, when I went to New Orleans to film with Candace Wilson, you know, the government and her, like, they confirmed that she was making $1 million a month at one point. And I was like, girl, if I was making $1 million a month, I might have done it for like 3 months and then like dipped out, like invested the money. And she said to me, she looked at me very seriously in my eyes and she was just like, no, you wouldn't have, sis. She was like, it's an addiction. She was just like, having that money and how easily that money came was an addiction. So it's just like each of them get caught up in the lifestyle in a different way. And one of the one of the common threads throughout each of their stories is when they were making so much money, it was an addiction. And so many of them had so many people to support, you know, they had whole families, sometimes a couple of families to support. So when you have that kind of pressure on your back, it's hard to just be like, okay, I'm going to stop now.
And then in all cases, you see that there's these benevolent, generous people. They're so good to their friends. They're so good to their families, to the point where these friends and families are still with them to this day, supporting them in the documentary. So I can understand that pressure to feel like you have to show up, because if I take this all away, it's going to affect everybody's livelihood. So I really see that, especially when children are involved. Like, I don't want my kids to go without. So I do see how that can hook these, you know, these individuals in. It's unfortunate, but I see it.
That was one of the, when you mentioned children, that was something that was really important to me this season too. Like last season 2 was my first season on the series. And I got to know a lot of the women, and I got to know a lot of the women's kids, and I saw what happened to those kids. And this season going into it, I definitely wanted to make sure the children, that we spoke with the children of these women, because one of the other common threads is like while the moms are like out in the streets and they're doing their things and they're providing for their kids, they missed that the kids just really needed them and just love. Yeah.
No, I saw that too. I thought it was interesting with it in Miss T's case. You know, her daughter was just kind of like, my mother is somebody. Like, I see how men address other women around here, and she's being sort of received differently, like a boss or a leader. And there's something amiss that I don't understand, but there's something going on. And her daughter started to kind of understand that, you know, they didn't have a typical life. I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, because, you know, a lot of the moms are like not going to be like, "Ooh, I'm selling drugs."
Right.
Ooh, I'm like committing these crimes. They don't want their kids to know. At the end of the day, there's a certain level of embarrassment too behind it. You know what I mean?
I thought Kimberly's story was really quite interesting, because she kind of began in a life of crime in another direction, and then started another life of crime. But in all of the cases with all of these women, they are so super ambitious, just like on another level, like beyond most people. You know that if they never even entered the criminal like underworld, they would have still been very successful women anyway, because they just have that thing, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's like, I always like wonder, like, why did you decide to use your powers for bad as opposed to good? Because all of these women could have been running Fortune 500 companies. Like, if you 100%. If you could use your brain power to commit all of these like crazy crimes, because they're very intricate crimes. I mean, like Gina Cabell, like, girl, you went on the dark web. You did all of that.
In the early 2000s.
Exactly, before it was easy to do so.
Yeah.
So it's like, to me, like, you know, you could have used your powers for good and just, you know, used your powers in a legal way and amassed as much of a fortune as you did when you were in the streets, and been able to sustain that fortune and keep providing for your family and not have to suffer any consequences.
But there's something I always think about too, because I think about like what the impact of social media on all of our self-esteem, and people just see these fast lifestyles and they want in like by any means necessary, and they start to become, you know, envious, or even they just look at these people as aspirational, not really knowing what's going on behind the scenes. So it's just like, I think the great thing about this series is it says like, you know, nothing comes that easy. And I always just say like, everybody can't at the same time. Somebody got to be broke, and that's, you know, happens to be me, but you know. Everybody can't have money, you know. It doesn't work like that.
No. And then every action causes a reaction.
Yes. So. There's a quote that I liked. It came from Dr. Thaddeus Johnson, the criminologist. And when he said, he's speaking particularly about Kimberly Smedley, you know, initially when she was involved in the butt shots, she felt like she was coming from a good place because she was giving these women self-esteem. But what he said was, you know, greed blinded a noble cause, and noble cause became corruption. And I was like, wow, like that's such an interesting way of putting it. But it's truly like it really clouded her judgment in that sense. And she of course comes to realize that with time. But it is
Yeah.
very interesting how greed can just, like you said, there's good and then there's bad. Mhm.
Yeah, it was the same thing with Candace Wilson too. You know, she started the pain management clinics. Well, actually, she started them as physical therapy clinics, and it was supposed to honor, her mom who had passed away. And then when she wasn't getting that many patients, and she saw how the pain management clinics were getting a lot of patients, she
Yeah.
was just like, "Let's do that instead." So it's
Mhm.
sort of the same thing as Kimberly.
That's quite interesting. My sister is a pharmacist, so she kind of understands how bad that world can become. And she's seen that. She's seen like people that really, really had very, very good intentions, and they're looking at their clients and they're just like cripplingly in pain. And that kind of thing with opioids and so forth, it just becomes such a sad, sad like decline. So
Mhm.
I'm familiar with those kind of stories as well. What do we have? I know that those are the first 5 episodes have already dropped, but what do we have to look forward to in the next episodes that are coming up?
You're gonna have to wait and see.
I was gonna try to sneak that in.
I'm not gonna tell you.
How did I know I wasn't gonna get nothing? I was like, maybe she'll just, you know.
Coco. No, you're not gonna catch me up.
No, but I really do love this series. And when I've spoken to every single one of these women and looked at the kind of redemption work that they're doing, like even speaking to prisons, group home work, I'm just trying to encourage people to stay out of a life of crime. I mean, there's high stakes here. You've got women that have been shot, have seen people murdered in front of them. I mean, have been robbed. In all cases, somebody wants something from you that they feel they deserve more than you. I mean, that's different than going to work every day and going for the same promotion and then you don't get the role. This is somebody where you got to watch your back, So I would never want to live with I think we all have anxiety to some extent, but that's a whole different level, especially if you have children.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to like look at like all of their story and not just like, oh, they made a lot of money. Oh, they were able to buy a lot of fun things. Oh, they were about like, able to travel to a lot of like really exotic places. But at the end of the day, like they were in the streets and the streets are not kind and
No.
people wanted to get what they had and would do anything to get it, and murder, kidnapping, whatever they had to do. So those are the things that they were up against. Very dangerous life when you're doing illegal things. It's not just the police and the FBI that you have to worry about.
Because you can't call in a robbery from a robber when you're doing something in the, the underworld yourself. So it's like, hey, they stole my drugs. It doesn't work. Doesn't work like that.
Exactly.
Yes, for sure. So, I mean, with respect to the stories themselves too, and all the different regions, like how many hours goes into putting together, like researching an episode and how you're going to tell the story? Because I'm so interested in this.
Oh my God. I would say that we spent about 3 months developing season 3 before we actually started filming.
Okay.
There were a lot of women that approached us that wanted to tell their stories, and we had to consider each and every one of them. And you spend a lot of time with them. A lot of it is like Zoom calls and telephone calls, but you spend a lot of time with them, and then you start speaking to the people that are closest to them to get like a fuller picture of their story. So we take a lot of time and thought behind putting these seasons together. We don't just like pick up women and say, okay, we're going to tell your story. We spend a lot of time getting to know them as people, because we're in essence going to spend like several months with them. It's been a year. When I think about it, like last April is when last March, April is when we started developing season 3, and we didn't go into pre-production until August. So you spend a lot of time with them. It's not just like in the beginning developing, shooting with them, like afterwards, you have to call them and ask them questions, because for us, for A. Smith and BET, it's very important that we tell these stories correctly and that we're authentic in our storytelling, because these are people's lives. It's television and it can be entertaining when our audience watches it, but at the end of the day, these are real stories. These are real people's lives. And so we take that very seriously. And I personally made a promise to each and every woman this season that I was going to tell their stories correctly, especially as a Black woman. We don't often get to have our stories told in the right way and by us. And so I made that promise to them, and I felt like I kept it.
That's wonderful. And what challenges, because you did start last year with COVID going on as well. I mean, how was that challenging in the filming process?
Well, I would say the second season was the most challenging because that was at the height of COVID.
True.
Like we started development and production in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of our when we as producers, we weren't allowed to go into the field, so we had to do all of the interviewing via Zoom, and we just had like a cameraman who did everything. Chris Dvorak, I love you. And
Chris Dvorak.
And then we had like a COVID compliance officer who also served as like a production coordinator who was with them. But this season, the producers actually got a chance to go into the field. It was still just like one producer, Chris, and a coordinator and a PA, but it was a little bit more. And then the rest of the team stayed behind and would watch all of the interviews via Zoom.
So what's next for A. Smith & Co., of course, and BET Plus and any kind of collaborations that we can talk about? I mean, if you want to, if you can.
Can't really say, but both A. Smith and both BET have a lot of like really juicy and exciting programming coming up. I
know that's right. It's been wonderful speaking to you. And I love to get that behind the scenes, interesting like information. You know, I always talk to a lot of the actors. So I feel like I was almost in a class. Like, oh, that's how they do it.
Well, I'm glad it was informing.
No, it was very, very informing. And again, guys, the first 5 episodes are on right now. We're in season 3 that debuted on April 7th. So you can do the binge watch like I always do. But she's not telling me what's up next. So I'm gonna have to just wait. But I'm going to binge watch like I always do. But BET Plus, go ahead and stream the app. I mean, it's amazing. There's a lot of great content on there. And I do love BET because they also support Black film as well. And A. Smith & Co. love everybody over there. I promise you. I've done a lot of interviews for A. Smith. So I really, really appreciate that. Is there anything else? Like there's nothing next that you can talk about within your own sphere beyond A. Smith & Co. and BET Plus?
Oh, I'm always working on some juicy projects.
Thank you for your time. Once again, thank you. My name is Koku with blackfilm.com, and I'm here with Andrena Hale, co-executive producer of American Gangster, Trap Queens, streaming on BET Plus now. And shout out to A. Smith & Co. They make a lot of wonderful, wonderful things happen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Coco.
We're gonna have to talk again. I'm gonna find a reason. Thank you so much. I would love to support your future projects as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
If you want to see more content like this on blackfilm.com, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that bell.